The iron beam came down without warning, trapping Daniel Garrett's right hand between 2,000 pounds of unforgiving metal and the packed earth of the barn floor. And in that single moment of crushing agony, everything he had built in Colorado City came crashing down with it. The summer of 1882 had been merciless in its heat, baking the high plains of Colorado until the grass turned brittle and yellow. Daniel had been raising the new barn alone, stubbornly insisting he could manage the heavy beams by himself despite his neighbor's warnings. The rope had frayed. The pulley had given way. And now, as three men finally lifted the beam off him and he saw the mangled ruin of his hand, he knew his life as a rancher was over. Doc Morrison worked for 6 hours trying to save what he could. When he finally emerged from the back room of his office, his face was grim. Daniel's hand would heal, but it would never be the same. 3 fingers were crushed beyond repair, the bones splintered into fragments too small to set properly. The thumb and index finger might retain some function, but the grip strength, the dexterity, the ability to rope cattle or handle tools with any real precision, that was gone forever. Daniel stared at the bandaged mass at the end of his right arm and felt something die inside him. He was 26 years old, and he had spent 8 years building his ranch from nothing. He had survived harsh winters, drought, and cattle thieves. He had scrimped and saved every dollar, expanding his herd gradually, improving his land bit by bit. The ranch was finally starting to turn a real profit, and now, with one stupid mistake, he could not work it alone anymore. The first week after the accident, neighbors brought food and offered sympathy. They meant well, but their pity stung worse than the constant throbbing pain in his ruined hand. Daniel had always been independent, proud of what he had accomplished through his own sweat and determination. Now he needed help with everything. He could not saddle his horse properly. He could not rope anything. He could not even button his own shirt with one hand still wrapped in bandages and the other clumsy with unfamiliar tasks. His closest neighbor, Frank Morrison, suggested hiring a ranch hand, but Daniel had done the mathematics in his head 100 times. The profit margin on his operation was thin enough that paying wages would consume most of what he made. He would be working just to break even, and what was the point of that? He might as well sell the place and take whatever job in town his crippled hand would allow. The thought of giving up his ranch, his dream, filled him with a black despair that settled over him like a suffocating blanket. He spent long nights sitting on his porch, staring out at land he could no longer properly work, wondering what the hell he was supposed to do now. That was when Eleanor Vance arrived in Colorado City. She stepped off the afternoon stage on a Tuesday in early August, carrying a single battered carpet bag and wearing a dress that had seen better days. She was 23 years old, tall and lean, with auburn hair pinned back severely and eyes the color of Colorado spruce trees. She moved with a purposeful stride that suggested she was accustomed to hard work, and when she spoke to the stage driver about where she might find lodging, her voice carried a note of determination that allowed no room for doubt or hesitation. Eleanor had come west from Kansas after her father's farm had been foreclosed on by the bank. Her mother had died 3 years earlier, and her father had followed 6 months ago, his heart giving out under the weight of losing everything he had worked for. Eleanor had grown up working that farm, doing the labor of any ranch hand because her father had no sons and could not afford to hire help. She knew how to handle livestock, how to mend fences, how to work from dawn until dusk without complaint. She was strong, capable, and completely alone in the world. What she needed now was work. Any work. She had exactly $12 to her name, and she needed employment before that ran out. The boarding house owner, Mrs. Carmichael, was a practical woman who recognized desperation when she saw it. She gave Eleanor a room on credit, with the understanding that payment would come as soon as Eleanor found work. Then she sat Eleanor down in her kitchen and explained the realities of the situation. "There are not many jobs for women here," Mrs. Carmichael said bluntly. "You could work at the saloon, but I do not recommend it. The hotel needs a maid, but that pays almost nothing. There is a seamstress in town, but she barely makes enough to feed herself. Your best option would be to find a husband, frankly." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "I am not looking for a husband. I am looking for work. Real work. I can handle cattle, mend fences, break horses if needed. I grew up on a farm." Mrs. Carmichael looked at her with something like sympathy. "Most ranchers around here would not hire a woman for that kind of work, dear. It just is not done." "Then I will convince them it should be done," Eleanor said firmly. She spent the next 2 days going from ranch to ranch, asking for work. Most ranchers laughed in her face. Some were more polite about it, explaining that they simply could not hire a woman for ranch work, that it would not be proper, that she did not understand how hard the work was. Eleanor listened to each rejection with a stoic expression, thanked them for their time, and moved on to the next place. She was walking back toward town late on the second day, dusty and discouraged, when she passed a ranch that looked different from the others. The main house was small but well built, the fences in good repair despite some obvious recent neglect. But what caught her attention was the half-built barn with a pile of lumber beside it, and a man sitting on the porch who watched her pass with hollow eyes. Something about the way he sat there, the defeated slump of his shoulders, the bandaged hand resting in his lap, made her stop walking. "Excuse me," she called out. "Are you hiring?" Daniel looked at the woman standing at the edge of his property and felt a surge of irritation. He was not in the mood for visitors, especially not some woman who probably wanted to sell him something or preach at him about the Lord's plan, or whatever other nonsense people used to make themselves feel better about the cruelties of life. "No," he said curtly. Eleanor studied him for a long moment. She saw the bandaged hand, the unfinished barn, the general air of a place that was starting to slide into disrepair. She saw a man who needed help whether he admitted it or not. "That barn needs finishing," she observed. "I know that. I could finish it." Daniel actually laughed, though there was no humor in the sound. "You could finish it. Lady, those beams weigh 200 pounds each. Do you have any idea what is involved in building a barn?" "Yes," Eleanor said simply. "I built one with my father in Kansas. I know how to use a pulley system, how to brace the beams, how to do it safely. I also know how to handle livestock, mend fences, and do just about any other ranch work you might need done." Daniel stared at her. She was serious. This woman was actually serious. "I cannot afford to hire anyone," he said finally. "What can you afford?" Eleanor asked. She walked closer, up to the edge of his porch, and he could see that her dress was threadbare and her boots were worn nearly through. She was as desperate as he was, he realized, maybe more so. "Nothing," Daniel said flatly. "I've got money to buy feed and supplies, but not enough to pay wages that would make it worth anyone's time." "Room and board," Eleanor suggested. "And a small wage, whatever you can manage. I do not need much. I just need something." Daniel wanted to say no. The idea of having anyone see him in his current state, helpless and diminished, was humiliating. And having a woman do the work he should be doing himself seemed like the ultimate admission of failure. But as he looked at his unfinished barn, at his fences that needed mending, at the 100 tasks piling up that he simply could not do alone, he felt the refusal die in his throat. "Why would you want to do this kind of work?" he asked instead. "Because it is the work I know how to do," Eleanor replied, "and because I am good at it. Give me a week to prove myself. If I cannot do what I claim, I will leave. But if I can, then we both benefit. You get your ranch work done and I get a job." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. She met his gaze steadily, no pleading in her eyes, just a straightforward proposition. She was not asking for charity. She was offering a trade, her labor for his money. "All right," he heard himself say. "1 week. There is a small bunkhouse out back. It is not fancy, but it is clean and dry. I will pay you $5 for the week, plus meals. If it works out, we will talk about something more permanent." $5 was almost nothing, barely enough to survive on. But Eleanor nodded as if he had offered her a fortune. "When do I start?" she asked. "First light tomorrow," Daniel said. Eleanor showed up the next morning as the sun was just starting to paint the eastern sky pink and gold. Daniel was already up, boiling coffee with his left hand, struggling one-handed with tasks that used to be automatic. When he saw Eleanor walking across the yard wearing men's work clothes, a wide-brimmed hat, and boots that looked more suitable for ranch work than the worn shoes she had arrived in, he felt a mix of surprise and something uncomfortably close to hope. "Where did you get those clothes?" he asked. "Bought them yesterday at the general store," Eleanor said. "Cannot do ranch work in a dress. Now, show me what needs doing." Daniel showed her around the property, explaining what needed to be done. Eleanor listened intently, asking occasional questions that showed she actually understood what he was talking about. When he finished, she nodded. "I will start with finishing that barn," she said. "The longer those beams sit exposed to the weather, the more likely they are to warp. Then I will work on mending those fences in the south pasture. After that, we can discuss priorities." She said it with such calm confidence that Daniel almost believed she could do it. Almost. He watched from the porch as she examined the barn site, studying the half-raised structure and the pile of remaining beams. She tested the pulley system he had been using, frowned, and spent an hour reinforcing it with additional rope and changing the anchor points. Then she began the painstaking work of raising the next beam. Daniel told himself he was staying on the porch because his hand hurt, because the doctor had told him to rest it. But really, he was watching to see if she would fail, if she would prove to be just another person who talked big but could not deliver. Eleanor did not fail. She worked with a methodical efficiency that spoke of long experience. She used the pulleys intelligently, leveraging her weight and the mechanical advantage rather than trying to force anything through brute strength. When she needed to guide a beam into place, she used a long pole as a lever. When she needed to secure something, she braced it properly before releasing the tension on the ropes. She worked steadily through the morning, stopping only occasionally to drink water from the well. By noon, she had raised and secured 3 more beams, more progress than Daniel had made in the week before his accident. He brought her lunch, cold chicken and bread that she ate quickly before going back to work. "You should rest," Daniel said awkwardly. "The heat is getting bad." "I will rest when it gets truly hot," Eleanor replied. "Right now, I am just getting started." She worked until mid-afternoon when the sun was blazing down with enough intensity that continuing would have been dangerous. Then she moved to the barn's interior, working in the shade on securing crossbeams and checking all her morning's work for stability. Daniel found himself drawn off the porch, walking over to examine what she had accomplished. The work was solid. Better than solid, actually. It was professional quality, the kind of work a skilled carpenter would do. The beams were level, properly braced, secured with the right knots and techniques. "Where did you learn to do this?" Daniel asked. "My father," Eleanor said, wiping sweat from her forehead. "He said that if I was going to work like a ranch hand, I needed to learn to do it right. He was particular about things being done properly." "He taught you well," Daniel admitted. Over the next few days, Daniel watched Eleanor transform his ranch. She finished the barn, working with a careful precision that made him ashamed of his own earlier hasty efforts that had led to his accident. She mended all the fences in the south pasture, replacing rotten posts and restringing wire until the fence was taut and secure. She cleaned out the water troughs, repaired a section of the corral that had been damaged in a storm, and even managed to re-shoe his horse, a task Daniel had been dreading trying to do with one good hand. She worked from dawn until the heat drove her to shade, then worked again in the cooler evening hours. She never complained, never asked for help with tasks she could manage herself, and never treated Daniel like an invalid even though they both knew he could not do the work she was doing. At meals, which they took together in his kitchen, they talked little at first. Daniel was not used to company, and Eleanor seemed content with silence. But gradually, they began to share small pieces of their stories. Daniel told her about buying this land 8 years ago, about the dream of building something lasting and good. Eleanor told him about growing up on her father's farm, about the years of drought and debt that had finally consumed everything. "The bank gave us until spring," Eleanor said one evening as they ate dinner. "My father thought he could make it, thought one good year would turn things around, but his heart gave out in January. I think he knew deep down that it was already over. I think the knowing killed him more than the actual work did." Daniel heard the pain in her voice and felt an unexpected kinship with this woman who had lost everything just as he had nearly lost everything. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "So am I," Eleanor replied. "But being sorry does not change anything. All we can do is keep working, keep trying to build something better." At the end of the first week, Daniel paid Eleanor her $5 and told her the job was permanent if she wanted it. They negotiated a wage of $15 a month plus room and board. It was still low, but it was what Daniel could afford, and Eleanor accepted it without argument. She knew it was better than anything else she was likely to find. As summer deepened into August, they fell into a rhythm. Eleanor handled most of the physical ranch work that required two good hands. Daniel managed the finances, handled negotiations with buyers, and did lighter work that he could manage one-handed. Together, they kept the ranch running. But something else was growing between them, something neither of them acknowledged but both of them felt. It started small, in the way Daniel began to anticipate Eleanor's arrival in the kitchen each morning, in the way he found himself listening for her footsteps. It grew in the small considerations they showed each other. Eleanor making sure the coffee was strong the way Daniel liked it. Daniel saving the best portions of meat for Eleanor's plate because she worked so hard. One evening in late August, a wheel on the supply wagon broke. Eleanor examined it and determined they needed a replacement part from town. The next morning, Daniel announced he was going with her. "You do not need to," Eleanor said. "I can handle it." "I know you can," Daniel replied, "but I need to get off this ranch for a bit. Besides, we should pick up supplies while we are there." The ride to town took an hour. They sat on the wagon bench side by side, and Daniel found himself intensely aware of Eleanor's presence. The way the morning sun caught the red highlights in her hair, the way she handled the reins with confident ease. She had pushed her sleeves up against the growing heat, and he could see the lean muscle in her forearms, the tan line where her gloves ended, the small scar on her left wrist that she had told him came from a barbed wire fence when she was 15. In town, they split up to handle different errands. Daniel went to the feed store while Eleanor took the wagon wheel to the blacksmith. They agreed to meet at the general store in an hour. Daniel finished his business quickly and found himself with time to spare. On impulse, He walked to the dry goods store and bought a new pair of leather work gloves, good quality ones that would protect Eleanor's hands better than the worn-out pair she had been using. It was a small thing, but as he paid for them, he felt strangely nervous, like he was doing something more significant than just buying practical work gear. When they met up again, Daniel hesitated, then handed Eleanor the package. "What is this?" she asked. "Your gloves are falling apart," Daniel said gruffly. "You will hurt your hands on the wire if you keep using them." Eleanor opened the package and looked at the new gloves. They were exactly her size, exactly the style she preferred. She looked up at Daniel, and something shifted in her expression, something soft and vulnerable that he had never seen before. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You did not have to do that." "I know," Daniel said. "I wanted to." They loaded the wagon with supplies and started the journey back to the ranch. The day had grown hot, the sun blazing down from a cloudless sky. They rode in silence for a while, but it was a comfortable silence now, the kind of quiet that exists between people who have grown used to each other's presence. Halfway home, Eleanor suddenly pulled the wagon to a stop. Daniel looked at her questioningly. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," Eleanor said. She turned to face him directly. "I just wanted to say that this job, working for you, it has meant everything to me. When I came to Colorado City, I had almost nothing. No money, no prospects, no idea what I was going to do. You gave me a chance when no one else would. I want you to know that I appreciate that." Daniel felt his throat tighten. "You earned it. You have done more for this ranch in the past month than I could have done in 3 months, even with both hands working. I am the one who should be grateful." "Then I guess we are both grateful," Eleanor said, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I guess we are," Daniel agreed. They looked at each other for a long moment, and Daniel felt something pass between them, an acknowledgement of something that had been building for weeks. He wanted to say more, wanted to tell her that she had become more than just an employee to him, that he thought about her constantly, that her presence had filled a loneliness he had not even realized he was carrying. But the words would not come, tangled up with fear and uncertainty, and the persistent feeling that he had nothing to offer her, that she deserved better than a broken-down rancher with a crippled hand. Eleanor seemed to sense his struggle. She reached out and briefly touched his left hand where it rested on the wagon bench. It was just a moment, her fingertips against his knuckles, but it sent a jolt through him like touching a live wire. "We should get moving," she said softly. "Those supplies will not unload themselves." September brought cooler weather and the hard work of preparing for winter. There was hay to cut and store, firewood to split and stack, the barn and outbuildings to check for any gaps that might let in cold air. Daniel and Eleanor worked together, their cooperation now so practiced that they often anticipated each other's needs without speaking. Daniel's hand was healing slowly. The bandages had come off, revealing a mass of scar tissue and twisted fingers that would never straighten properly again. Doc Morrison had been right. The thumb and index finger had retained some function, enough that Daniel could grip large objects if he braced them carefully. But the delicate work, the quick, precise movements that ranch work required, those were beyond him now. He tried not to let Eleanor see how much it bothered him. But one afternoon, when he was struggling to tie off a rope with his limited grip, Eleanor quietly appeared at his elbow. "Let me," she said gently. Daniel wanted to refuse, wanted to insist he could do it himself. But he was tired of struggling, tired of taking 3 times as long as he should to do simple tasks. He stepped back and let Eleanor tie the knot with quick, efficient movements. "Thank you," he said, the words coming out rougher than he intended. Eleanor looked at him with understanding in her green eyes. "You are doing better," she said. 2 weeks ago you could not have handled that rope at all. Your grip is getting stronger." "Not strong enough," Daniel said bitterly. "Not enough to run this place without help." "So you need help," Eleanor said matter-of-factly. "That is not a weakness, Daniel. That is just reality. Everyone needs help sometimes. My father needed my help on the farm. I need your help managing the business side of this ranch because I have no head for the financial details." Needing help does not make you less. It just makes you human. Daniel looked at her, at this woman who had appeared in his life when he needed her most, who worked harder than any ranch hand he could have hired, who treated him with respect rather than pity. Something in his chest loosened, a knot of shame and anger that he had been carrying since the accident. "When did you get so wise?" he asked. Eleanor smiled. "I have always been wise. You were just too stubborn to notice." Despite himself, Daniel laughed. It felt good, that release of tension, the simple pleasure of sharing a moment of humor with someone who understood. As October arrived and the aspens turned gold in the high country, Daniel found himself increasingly aware that what he felt for Eleanor had moved far beyond gratitude or respect. He was falling in love with her, had probably been falling for weeks without admitting it to himself. He loved the way she moved, confident and capable in her work clothes. He loved her quiet strength, the way she faced every challenge with determination rather than complaint. He loved her rare smiles, the way her whole face transformed when something genuinely pleased her. He loved the small intimacies of their daily life together, the way they had developed private jokes and unspoken understandings. He loved the sound of her voice in the morning, the way she hummed sometimes while she worked, the way she looked at the mountains at sunset with an expression of peaceful contentment. But he had no idea if she felt the same way. She was friendly, certainly. She seemed to enjoy his company. But was that love, or just the camaraderie of two people working toward a common goal? Daniel had no experience with women, had spent his adult life building his ranch rather than courting anyone. He had no idea how to tell if a woman's feelings went beyond simple friendship. He decided he would wait, would watch for a sign that Eleanor might want something more than their current arrangement. He would not risk making her uncomfortable or driving her away by declaring feelings she might not share. But waiting became harder with each passing day. One evening in mid-October, they were sitting on the porch after dinner, watching the last light fade from the sky. The air had turned crisp with the promise of the coming winter, and Eleanor had wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. Daniel had found himself noticing things like that lately, the way she looked in the evening light, the way she tucked a stray piece of hair behind her ear. "Daniel," Eleanor said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," Daniel replied. "Why did you really give me this job?" Eleanor asked. "I know you said you needed help, but most men would have tried to find a male ranch hand even if it cost more. Why did you say yes to me?" Daniel considered the question carefully. "Honestly, I think part of me recognized something in you. You were desperate but not beaten, determined to make your own way rather than accept charity or give up. I respected that, and I suppose I was desperate enough myself that I was willing to take a chance on someone unconventional." Eleanor nodded slowly. "I am glad you did. This has been the first time in years that I have felt like I have a real future, like I am building towards something instead of just trying to survive day to day." "You have earned that future," Daniel said. "Everything you have accomplished here is because of your own hard work." "We accomplished it together," Eleanor corrected gently. "You gave me the opportunity and you have taught me things too. How to negotiate with buyers, how to manage finances, all the business side that I never learned. We make a good team." "We do," Daniel agreed. His heart was pounding. He wanted to say more, wanted to tell her that he wanted them to be more than just a team, that he wanted to build a real future together. But fear held him back. What if she said no? What if he ruined the good thing they had by pushing for more? Eleanor was looking at him with an expression he could not quite read. "Daniel," she said softly, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" Daniel asked, his pulse racing. Before Eleanor could answer, they heard the sound of horses approaching fast. Daniel rose from his chair, tension running through him. Visitors after dark usually meant trouble. 3 riders appeared in the gathering dusk. Daniel recognized them immediately and felt his stomach sink. It was Tom Harker and 2 of his men. Harker owned the largest ranch in the area, and he had wanted Daniel's land for years. He had made several offers to buy, each one turned down. Daniel had hoped that was the end of it. "Evening, Garrett," Harker called out, not dismounting. He was a big man, florid-faced, with the kind of confidence that came from having money and power. "I hear you had yourself an accident." "I am healing," Daniel said curtly. "What do you want, Harker?" "Same thing I always want," Harker said. "Your land. But now I hear you are so hard up you had to hire a woman to do your ranch work." He looked at Eleanor with open contempt. "That true, Garrett? You have fallen so low you need a woman to take care of you." Daniel felt rage boil up in him, but Eleanor spoke before he could respond. "I work for Mr. Garrett because he hired me to do a job," Eleanor said calmly. "What business is it of yours who he employs?" Harker laughed. "Feisty one, are you not? Listen, sweetheart, whatever he is paying you, I will pay double if you come work for me instead. Though I had a different kind of work in mind than ranch labor, if you catch my meaning." The insult was deliberate and crude. Daniel moved forward, his good hand clenching into a fist, but Eleanor stepped in front of him. "I am not interested," she said coldly, "and I think you should leave now." "I am not talking to you, girl," Harker said dismissively. He looked at Daniel. "You think about my offer, Garrett. $3,000 for this place. That is more than fair for land you cannot even work properly anymore. You could take the money, start over somewhere else. Do something that does not require 2 good hands." "The ranch is not for sale," Daniel said flatly. "It was not for sale the last 5 times you asked, and it is not for sale now. Now get off my property." Harker's expression hardened. "You are making a mistake. Winter is coming. How are you going to handle the heavy work when the snow starts? How are you going to manage calving season with 1 good hand and a female ranch hand? You are going to fail, Garrett. And when you do, I will still be here, but my offer will be lower. Think about that." He wheeled his horse around and rode off, his 2 men following. Daniel and Eleanor watched until they disappeared into the darkness. "Bastard," Daniel muttered. "He is right, though," Eleanor said quietly. Daniel turned to stare at her. "What? Not about selling," Eleanor clarified quickly. "But about winter. It is going to be hard, calving season especially. We need to think about how we are going to manage." Daniel felt the brief flash of anger drain away, leaving only worry in its place. She was right. He had been trying not to think about winter, about all the challenges it would bring, but they needed to face reality. "We will figure it out," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Yes," Eleanor agreed. "We will together." That night, Daniel lay awake for hours, thinking about Harker's visit, about the challenges ahead, about everything that could go wrong. But mostly he thought about the way Eleanor had stepped in front of him, the way she had defended him without hesitation, the way she had said, "We will figure it out together." Whatever else happened, he knew he did not want to face the future without her. November came hard and fast, bringing early snow and bitter cold. The work became grueling. They had to break ice on the water troughs every morning, haul extra feed to the cattle, constantly check for any animals that had wandered off or gotten into trouble. Eleanor worked until her hands were raw and her back ached, but she never complained. Daniel did everything he could with his limited capabilities, frustrated constantly by his inability to pull his full weight. One afternoon, Eleanor found Daniel in the barn, struggling to lift a hay bale with one hand. He had managed to get it halfway up to the loft when his grip failed and the bale fell, nearly knocking him over. "Damn it!" Daniel shouted, slamming his good hand against the wall. "Damn it, damn it, damn it!" Eleanor walked over slowly. "Let me help," she said. "I do not want help," Daniel snapped. "I want to be able to do my own damn work on my own damn ranch." "But you cannot," Eleanor said bluntly. "Not alone. That is reality, Daniel. You can rage against it all you want, but it will not change. Now, do you want to waste time being angry, or do you want to get this hay loaded so the cattle do not go hungry?" Daniel stared at her, breathing hard. She was right, and he hated that she was right. He hated his weakness, hated his dependence on her, hated the helpless feeling that came with knowing he could not do the work he had done for 8 years. "I hate this," he said roughly. "I know," Eleanor said more gently, "but hating it does not change it. Come on, we do this together." They worked together to get the hay into the loft. Eleanor did the heavy lifting, but Daniel guided the bales and helped stack them. It went quickly with 2 people, even with one of them impaired. When they finished, Eleanor turned to him. "You are not useless, Daniel," she said firmly. "You manage the business. You handle the negotiations. You plan and organize everything we do. That is just as important as the physical work. Maybe you cannot do some things anymore, but you can still do many things. Do not forget that." Daniel looked at her, at this woman who had become essential to his life in ways that went far beyond ranch work. He felt his anger drain away, replaced by something deeper and more complicated. "How do you do it?" he asked quietly. "How do you stay so strong all the time?" "I do not," Eleanor admitted. "I just do not let you see when I am falling apart. I cry sometimes at night in the bunkhouse when everything feels overwhelming. But in the morning I get up and I keep going because what else is there to do? Giving up is not an option." The confession touched Daniel deeply. He had thought Eleanor was unshakable, that nothing bothered her. Knowing she struggled too, that she fought her own battles, made him feel closer to her somehow. "Thank you," he said, "for everything. For staying, for working so hard, for putting up with my bad moods. I could not do this without you." "Yes, you could," Eleanor said, "but I am glad you do not have to try." They stood there in the barn, close enough that Daniel could see the snowflakes caught in her hair, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her after their hard work. He wanted to reach out, wanted to pull her close, wanted to tell her everything he had been feeling for months. But he still could not quite make himself take that risk. Eleanor seemed to sense his hesitation. She reached out and gently took his damaged hand in both of hers. Daniel flinched, instinctively wanting to pull away, ashamed of the twisted, scarred mess she was holding. But Eleanor held on. "This does not make you less," she said softly, looking at his ruined hand. "It is just a part of you now, a part that proves you are a survivor." Daniel felt his throat tighten with emotion. No one had touched his injured hand like this before, had held it gently like it was something worthy of tenderness rather than pity. He looked down at Eleanor's work, roughened hands cradling his damaged one, and something broke open inside him. "Eleanor," he said hoarsely, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" Eleanor asked, looking up at him. "I have feelings for you," Daniel forced out. "Not just gratitude or friendship, real feelings. I think about you all the time. I care about you in ways that have nothing to do with ranch work. I know I have no right to feel this way, that I have nothing to offer you but a hard life on a struggling ranch with a man who cannot even work properly anymore. But I needed you to know. I could not keep pretending I did not feel it." Eleanor stared at him, her eyes wide. For a long, terrible moment she said nothing, and Daniel felt his heart sink. He had made a mistake. He had pushed too far, ruined everything. Then Eleanor smiled, a real smile that transformed her whole face. "You foolish man," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Do you honestly think I would work this hard, would stay here through everything if I did not have feelings for you too? I have been in love with you for months. I just did not think you felt the same way. You love me." Daniel asked, hardly daring to believe it. "Of course I love you," Eleanor said. "You are good and honest and hardworking. You treated me with respect when everyone else dismissed me. You gave me a chance to prove myself. You see me as a person, not just a woman or a worker. How could I not fall in love with you?" Daniel pulled her close with his good arm, and Eleanor came willingly, wrapping her arms around him. They stood there holding each other, and Daniel felt like he could finally breathe properly for the first time since his accident. She loved him. This incredible woman loved him. "I do not have much to offer," Daniel said into her hair. "The ranch is small, money is tight, and I am damaged goods now." "Stop," Eleanor said, pulling back to look at him. "You are not damaged goods. You are the man I love. And as for the ranch and money, we will manage. We have managed this far, have we not? We will keep managing together." "Together," Daniel repeated, liking the sound of that word. "Eleanor, will you marry me? I do not have a ring or any fancy words, but I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to build this ranch with you, grow old with you, face whatever comes with you by my side." "Yes," Eleanor said immediately. "Yes, of course I will marry you." Daniel kissed her then, a clumsy, awkward kiss because he had so little experience, but Eleanor did not seem to mind. She kissed him back with warmth and tenderness, and Daniel felt like his heart might burst from happiness. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Colorado City. It was a simple ceremony with just a handful of people attending. Frank Morrison stood up as Daniel's best man, and Mrs. Carmichael from the boarding house attended as Eleanor's witness. Eleanor wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Carmichael had helped her sew, and Daniel wore his best suit, brushed clean of dust. When the minister asked if he would take Eleanor to be his wife, Daniel answered with absolute certainty. When Eleanor promised to love and honor him, her voice was clear and strong. They exchanged simple gold bands that Daniel had bought with money carefully saved. After the ceremony, they rode back to the ranch together, Eleanor sitting close beside Daniel on the wagon bench. The December day was cold but clear, the mountains sharp against the blue sky. When they arrived home, Daniel carried Eleanor over the threshold of the ranch house, making her laugh with his determination to manage it despite his injured hand. That night, in the bedroom they would now share, Eleanor helped Daniel carefully undress. He was self-conscious about his scarred hand, his body that bore the marks of 8 years of hard labor. But Eleanor touched him with tenderness and desire, making him feel like he was enough, like he was exactly what she wanted. They made love slowly, learning each other, and afterward they lay tangled together in the darkness, Eleanor's head on Daniel's chest. "Are you happy?" Daniel asked softly. "More than I ever thought I could be," Eleanor replied. "Are you?" "Yes," Daniel said simply. "I spent so long thinking my life was over after the accident, but it was not over, it was just changing, it was making room for you. We will make this work," Eleanor said firmly. "The ranch, our life together, all of it, I promise you." "I know we will," Daniel said. "With you by my side, I believe we can do anything." Winter settled in hard after their wedding, but somehow the challenges seemed more manageable with Eleanor as his wife rather than just his employee. They worked together through the bitter cold, through the calving season that January brought, through the daily grind of keeping the ranch running. It was exhausting work, but at the end of each day they had each other. Eleanor moved her things from the bunkhouse into the main house, and the place that had felt empty for so long suddenly felt like a real home. She put curtains on the windows, hung pictures on the walls, filled the rooms with small touches that made everything warmer and more welcoming. In February, Tom Harker tried one more time to buy the ranch. He rode up with an offer of $2,500, calling it his final proposal. Daniel and Eleanor stood together on the porch and turned him down without hesitation. "This land is not for sale," Eleanor said firmly. "Not now, not ever. This is our home. We are building a life here and we are not giving that up." Harker looked at them with disgust. "You are fools. You will not last another year." "Then that is our problem, not yours," Daniel said. "Now get off our property and do not come back." Harker left, and they never saw him again. Apparently, he finally understood that Daniel was never going to sell, no matter what happened. Spring came eventually, as it always did, bringing relief from the cold and new work to be done. Eleanor planted a garden behind the house, vegetables and flowers both. She said a home needed beauty as well as sustenance. Daniel teased her about the flowers, but secretly he loved them, loved the way she tended them in the evenings, loved the way she would bring fresh bouquets into the house. One afternoon in May, Eleanor came into the house looking thoughtful. Daniel was working on the ranch accounts at the kitchen table. "I have some news," Eleanor said. Daniel looked up, immediately concerned by her tone. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," Eleanor said quickly. "Actually, something is very right. Daniel, I am going to have a baby." Daniel stared at her, the words not quite making sense for a moment. Then understanding hit him like a thunderbolt. "A baby," he repeated. "You are pregnant?" "Yes," Eleanor said, smiling. "I am about 2 months along, I think. We are going to have a child in the fall." Daniel stood up so fast he nearly knocked over his chair. He crossed to Eleanor and pulled her close, holding her gently as if she might break. "Are you happy about this?" Eleanor asked softly. "Happy." Daniel laughed. "I am terrified and thrilled and amazed all at once. A baby, our baby. Eleanor, this is incredible. We will have to figure out how to manage the ranch work when I cannot do as much," Eleanor said practically. "And we will need to prepare the house for a child. There is a lot to do." "We will handle it," Daniel said with certainty. "Just like we have handled everything else, together." Over the summer, they prepared for the baby's arrival. Daniel converted a small room off their bedroom into a nursery, building a cradle with his limited grip, and Eleanor's help guiding his hands when precision was needed. Eleanor sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her needle flashing in the lamplight as she worked in the evenings. As Eleanor's pregnancy progressed, Daniel insisted on taking over more of the heavy ranch work. His injured hand had improved slightly over time. He would never have full function back, but he had learned to adapt, to find ways to work around his limitations. He rigged up various tools and devices that let him manage tasks that would have been impossible immediately after the accident. A special hook attached to his belt let him secure ropes. A modified hammer with extra grip let him drive fence posts. He was slower than he used to be, but he could manage more than he had thought possible. Eleanor, for her part, was stubborn about continuing to work as long as she could. Even as her belly swelled, she insisted on helping with lighter tasks, organizing supplies, managing the chickens they had acquired, tending her garden. Doc Morrison checked on her regularly and declared she was healthy and strong, that the baby was growing well. In late September, Eleanor went into labor. It was a long, difficult night, and Daniel paced outside the bedroom where Mrs. Carmichael and Doc Morrison attended to Eleanor. He heard her cry out in pain and felt helpless, unable to do anything to ease her suffering. It was worse than when his own hand had been crushed, this feeling of being unable to help someone he loved, Finally, as dawn was breaking, he heard a new sound. A baby's cry, strong and healthy. Doc Morrison came out of the bedroom, smiling. "You have a son," he said, "and your wife is doing fine. She is tired but healthy. You can go in now." Daniel entered the bedroom to find Eleanor propped up against pillows, sweaty and exhausted but smiling. In her arms was a tiny bundle, and when she pulled back the blanket, Daniel saw his son for the first time. The baby had a shock of dark hair and a red, wrinkled face that was somehow the most beautiful thing Daniel had ever seen. "What should we name him?" Eleanor asked softly. Daniel thought for a moment. "What about James? After your father?" Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "James is perfect. James Garrett, our son." Daniel sat on the bed beside Eleanor and carefully touched his son's tiny hand. The baby's fingers wrapped around Daniel's index finger with surprising strength, and Daniel felt his heart swell with a love so fierce it was almost painful. "Hello, James," he whispered. "Welcome to the world. We are going to give you a good life, I promise." The first months with a baby were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. James proved to have strong lungs and firm opinions about when he wanted to eat, sleep, or be held. Eleanor recovered quickly from the birth and was soon back to helping with lighter ranch work. James strapped to her back in a sling as she moved around the property. Daniel was amazed by how natural Eleanor was as a mother, how she seemed to instinctively know what James needed. She nursed him while managing the household accounts. She sang to him while she worked in the garden. She brought him out to the barn in his basket so she could keep an eye on him while she helped Daniel with various tasks. As James grew, he became the center of their lives. His first smile made them both ridiculously happy. His first attempts to crawl were celebrated like a major achievement. When he took his first steps at 10 months old, walking between Eleanor and Daniel with determination on his chubby face, they both cheered like he had just won a race. Life on the ranch continued to be hard work, but it felt different now. They were not just maintaining a property. They were building a legacy for their son. Every fence they mended, every improvement they made, it was all for James and whatever siblings might come along. When James was 2 years old, Eleanor became pregnant again. This time, she knew what to expect and managed the pregnancy with practiced ease. Their second child, a daughter they named Sarah, was born in the spring of 1886. She had Eleanor's green eyes and a temperament that was somehow both fierce and sweet. Over the years that followed, Daniel and Eleanor's ranch grew slowly but steadily. They never became wealthy, but they made enough to live comfortably. They added more cattle, improved their buildings, slowly expanded their operation. Daniel's injured hand remained a challenge, but he had so thoroughly adapted to working around it that most days he barely thought about it. It was just part of who he was now, a reminder that he had survived and rebuilt his life. Other families moved into the area, and Colorado City grew from a small frontier town into a proper community. James and Sarah grew up with other children, attended the new school that was built, learned the ranch work from both their parents. Daniel made sure both of his children learned that hard work and determination mattered more than gender, that Sarah was just as capable of ranch work as James if she chose to do it. By 1895, James was 13 and already nearly as tall as Daniel. Sarah was 9 and fearless, riding horses like she had been born in the saddle. Eleanor still worked the ranch alongside Daniel, her hair now showing threads of gray but her strength undiminished. They had added a third child, a son named Thomas, who was 6 years old and already showing signs of his father's stubborn independence. One evening, Daniel and Eleanor sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. It had become their ritual over the years, this quiet time together at the end of the day. The children were playing in the yard, their laughter drifting across the property. "You ever regret it?" Daniel asked. "Marrying me, taking on this life?" Eleanor looked at him with surprise. "Regret it?" "Daniel, this is the life I always wanted. A home of my own, children, meaningful work, a partner who respects me. Why would I regret any of that?" "It has been hard," Daniel said. "So much work, so little money sometimes, all the struggles." "Yes, it has been hard," Eleanor agreed. "But it has also been good, better than good. We built this together, Daniel, this ranch, this family, this life. Every bit of it is ours, something we created through our own effort. How could I regret that?" Daniel reached over and took her hand, still marveling after all these years that she was his, that she had chosen him. "I love you," he said simply. "I love you too," Eleanor replied. "Always have, always will." As they sat there watching the sunset, Daniel thought about that day 13 years ago when his hand had been crushed, when he had thought his life was over. He thought about how wrong he had been. That accident had not ended his life. It had just pushed him onto a different path, one that had led him to Eleanor, to love, to a family and a future he never could have imagined. His hand was still damaged. He would never have full use of it again. But Eleanor had done the work his hands could not. She had saved his ranch, had become his partner in every sense of the word. And together, they had built something that would last, something they could pass on to their children and their children's children. Years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life. Calving seasons and harsh winters, good years and lean years, all of it woven together into the fabric of their lives. James eventually took over more of the heavy ranch work as he grew into a strong young man. Sarah proved to have a gift for working with horses, training them with a patience and skill that amazed everyone. Thomas was the scholar of the family, showing more interest in books than livestock, and Daniel and Eleanor encouraged him to pursue whatever path made him happy. By 1900, Daniel was 44 years old, his hair starting to gray, his body bearing the marks of years of hard labor. But he was healthy and happy, surrounded by family and the land he had built a life on. Eleanor was 41, still beautiful to Daniel, still the strongest person he knew. They watched their children grow into adults, watched them make their own choices about their futures. James decided to stay on the ranch, working alongside his father and eventually taking over more of the management. He married a local girl named Catherine, and they gave Daniel and Eleanor their first grandchild, a boy they named Daniel after his grandfather. Sarah eventually married a horse trainer from Denver and moved to the city, though she visited often and always said the ranch would be her true home. Thomas went east to college, studying to become a teacher, but he promised to return to Colorado someday. Through all of it, Daniel and Eleanor remained partners, working together, supporting each other, loving each other with a depth that only deepened with time. They had survived so much together, had overcome challenges that would have broken weaker people. The accident that had nearly destroyed Daniel's life had instead led him to the greatest blessing he had ever known. On a warm summer evening in 1905, Daniel and Eleanor sat on their porch once again, now watching their grandson playing in the yard while James and Catherine worked in the barn. They were grandparents now, older and grayer, but still together, still strong. "You remember the day we met?" Eleanor asked. "You were sitting on this very porch looking like the world had ended." "I remember," Daniel said. "I thought it had ended. I thought losing the use of my hand meant losing everything." "Instead, you gained everything," Eleanor said softly. "We gained everything," Daniel corrected. "Neither of us would have survived alone, but together we built something real and lasting." Eleanor leaned against him, and Daniel wrapped his good arm around her, his damaged hand resting comfortably on the arm of his chair. It no longer bothered him, that twisted, scarred hand. It was just part of his story now, a reminder of where he had been and how far he had come. "I would do it all again," Eleanor said. "Every hard day, every struggle, every challenge, because it all led to this, to us, to our family." "So would I," Daniel agreed. "Every single moment." They sat together as the sun set, just as they had done thousands of times before, just as they would do thousands of times more. Two people who had found each other when they both needed it most, who had built a life together through determination and love and the simple refusal to give up. Daniel's hand had been crushed and he could not work alone, but Eleanor had done the work his hands could not, and in doing so she had not just saved his ranch. She had saved him, had given him a future when he thought he had none. She had taught him that strength came in many forms, that accepting help was not weakness but wisdom, that love could heal wounds deeper than any physical injury. They had started with nothing but desperation and determination. Now they had everything that truly mattered: love, family, a home built on land they had worked with their own hands, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars began to appear, Daniel pulled Eleanor closer and thanked whatever force had brought her to his ranch that day so many years ago. She had been exactly what he needed, exactly when he needed her. And he liked to think he had been the same for her. Together they had built a life worth living. And that, Daniel knew, was more than most people ever got. It was everything. The years rolled on like the seasons, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. By 1910, Daniel and Eleanor were approaching their 60s, their faces lined with age but their spirits still strong. The ranch had prospered under James's management, and he had expanded it beyond what Daniel had ever imagined possible. Sarah visited regularly with her husband and their two daughters, filling the house with laughter. Thomas had returned to Colorado after completing his education, and now taught at the school in Colorado City, living in town but spending weekends at the ranch. Daniel's injured hand had long since become just another part of him, like his gray hair or the deep lines around his eyes. Some days it ached when the weather changed, but he barely noticed any more. It had shaped his life in ways he never could have predicted, leading him to Eleanor, teaching him humility and resilience, showing him that strength came in many forms. One afternoon in late summer, Daniel and Eleanor took a walk around the property together. They moved more slowly now than they once had, but they still walked hand in hand, Eleanor's calloused fingers laced with Daniel's twisted ones. "Look at this place," Eleanor said, gesturing at the well-maintained buildings, the healthy cattle grazing in the pastures, the garden bursting with vegetables and flowers. "Remember when it was just you and a half-finished barn? And then it was you and me and a whole lot of work ahead of us," Daniel added with a smile. "The best decision I ever made was stopping to ask if you were hiring that day," Eleanor said. "I could have kept walking. I almost did, but something told me to stop, to take a chance." "I am glad you listened to that something," Daniel said. "You saved my life, Eleanor. In every way that matters, you saved my life." "And you saved mine," Eleanor replied. "I was lost and alone and had no idea what I was going to do. You gave me a purpose, a home, a family. You gave me everything." They walked a bit further, up to the small cemetery plot on the hillside where they had buried Daniel's parents years ago. They had already picked out their own spots here, side by side under a spreading oak tree, looking out over the land they had worked together. "When we are gone," Daniel said thoughtfully, "I hope our grandchildren and their children remember that none of this came easy, that we worked for every bit of it, that we struggled and failed and got back up and tried again. I hope they understand that the important things in life are worth fighting for." "They will know," Eleanor assured him. "We have taught them well. All three of our children understand the value of hard work and determination. They will pass that on." Daniel looked at his wife, at the woman who had stood beside him for nearly 30 years, who had never wavered in her commitment to him and their life together. She was still beautiful to him, even with her gray hair and lined face. She would always be beautiful. "I love you," he said, the words as true now as they had been the first time he spoke them in that barn so long ago. "I love you too," Eleanor replied, rising on her toes to kiss him softly. "Until the end of time, Daniel Garrett, until the end of time." They stood there together on the hillside, looking out over the ranch they had built, the family they had raised, the life they had created from desperation and hard work and enduring love. Daniel's hand was still damaged, would be until the day he died. But it had brought him to Eleanor, and that made it the greatest blessing he had ever received. Behind them, they could hear their grandson calling for them, his young voice bright with excitement. They turned and walked back down the hill together, ready to see what new adventure awaited. There would be many more years ahead, many more moments of joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge. But they would face it all together as they always had. Daniel Garrett's hand had been crushed, and he could not work alone. Eleanor Vance had done the work his hands could not. And together, they had built a legacy that would last for generations, a testament to the power of love, determination, and the simple willingness to help each other when help was needed most. As the sun set over the Colorado mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Daniel and Eleanor walked home with their grandson between them, each holding one of his small hands. The ranch stretched out around them, solid and permanent, a monument to everything they had overcome and everything they had achieved. It was not the life Daniel had imagined when he first bought this land all those years ago. It was better. It was richer and fuller and more meaningful than anything he could have planned. Because it included Eleanor and their children and their grandchildren, and a love that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger each time. His hand was still crushed, still twisted and scarred and weak. But it had led him to exactly where he was supposed to be, to exactly who he was supposed to be with. And for that, Daniel would be grateful every day for the rest of his life. They reached the house as full darkness fell, the windows glowing warm with lamplight, the sounds of family gathering for the evening meal drifting out into the night. Daniel held the door for Eleanor, watching as she stepped inside, watching as she smiled at their son and daughter-in-law, watching as she scooped up their grandson and kissed his cheek. This was home. This was family. This was everything that mattered. Daniel followed Eleanor inside, closing the door behind them, and the sound of laughter and love filled the night air. The ranch would continue long after they were gone, passed down through the generations, a living legacy of two people who had refused to give up, who had found each other when they both needed it most, who had built something lasting and true. And it had all started with a crushed hand, a desperate woman looking for work, and the courage to take a chance on something unconventional. Sometimes, Daniel reflected as he sat down to dinner surrounded by the people he loved most in the world, the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best things we will ever find. His hand had been crushed. Eleanor had done the work his hands could not. And together, they had created a love story for the ages, a testament to the enduring power of partnership, determination, and the simple act of showing up for each other, day after day, year after year, through whatever challenges life brought their way. As they sat together that night, sharing a meal and stories and laughter, Daniel caught Eleanor's eye across the table. She smiled at him, that private smile that was just for him, and he smiled back. 30 years, and that smile still made his heart race. 30 years, and he still could not believe his good fortune in finding her. The future stretched ahead, full of promise and possibility. There would be more grandchildren, more growth, more changes. But through it all, Daniel and Eleanor would face it together, partners until the very end, bound by a love that had been forged in struggle and tempered by time into something unbreakable. Daniel raised his glass. To family, he said. To hard work, to never giving up. And to the woman who saved my life and gave me everything. To us, Eleanor added softly, her eyes shining with tears and joy. All of us together. They drank, and the evening continued, filled with warmth and love and the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead and the Colorado wind whispered through the grass, and the ranch stood solid and enduring, a monument to everything two people could accomplish when they refused to face the world alone. Daniel's hand had been crushed, but his spirit had not. And with Eleanor by his side, he had built a life beyond his wildest dreams, a legacy that would echo through the generations, a love story that proved that sometimes the worst disasters lead us to the greatest blessings. And that, in the end, was all that mattered. Not the struggles or the setbacks, but what you built from them. Not the wounds you carried, but how you learned to live with them. Not the times you fell, but the times you got back up, especially when someone reached down to help you rise. Daniel Garrett had fallen. Eleanor Vance had helped him rise, and together they had soared higher than either could have managed alone. That was their story. That was their legacy. That was their happily ever after, hard-won and precious and absolutely real.